For this picture, I've been working from a couple of old sepia photographs I found of the fishing port of Whitby on the northeast coast of the UK. It's a lovely place to go and visit today, even without the sailing drifters and sailing ships and so forth. Good place to sit and paint. This is an old sepia photograph with a fishing boat with some of its sails up, basically, either just coming into land, with a small steam tug in the background and one or two other boats as well. And I did this picture, painted it pen and wash into a moleskin sketchbook, and this is what I achieved with this. This is a moleskin sketchbook which I've basically dedicated to sort of seaports and scenes of ships, old ships and so forth. Thames sailing barge, Tower Bridge with an old passenger vessel, Whitby Harbour, and this was a painting that I did. As I say, it's pen and wash. I wanted to capture the light both on the water and in the sky. You can see this dark cloud area up here. That was not entirely intentional. For some reason in this particular sketchbook I found that there appears to be some sort of slightly oily marks on some of the pages, and when that occurs on watercolour paper, the paint just does not spread onto it very well at all. So this dark area here, this was done. They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and I had to sort of hit it with stickier and stickier colour in order to try and hide or cover up that fault in the paper. But it actually produced quite a nice cloud formation. So I'm going to do this painting again, not pen and wash, just watercolour paints, with perhaps not quite such an intrusive sky. And the idea is that I want to have these areas in the middle and far distance, quite light and misty, with little detail. A little bit of contrast up here with these buildings, the old church and so forth, monastery in ruins and so forth in the background, and then the main focal point being this vessel and these two smaller boats down here, but capturing the light in the pool area here and just above the distant buildings. I'm going to keep to a fairly limited palette. The blues will be Payne's grey with a little bit of ultramarine blue to warm it up, especially down here in the foreground. There'll be, for the sails and some of the houses and so forth, burnt sienna, burnt umber, a little bit of yellow ochre as well. I'll use yellow ochre in the middle distance here. But apart from that, no other colours. It's going to be wet into wet, so we're going to, having drawn the picture, we're going to wet the entire paper and work from there. So here is the drawing complete. I've cut out some of the detail work which I didn't particularly want from the photograph. Cut out a large ship over here. I wanted to try and get an arrangement where we had the main focal point here slightly off centre. The advantage is that it's got these lovely tall masts and tall or lines going from top to bottom in the form of masts or lampposts or whatever else, tied the bottom and the top of the picture together quite nicely. And any major detail work will be drawn in later on with the paintbrush rather than with the pencil. So I'm going to start off by wetting the entire painting. I'm using Arch's watercolour paper, 300 gram, and this is not, so it's cold pressed paper, which has a lovely tooth to it. It's not anywhere near quite as rough as their rough paper, which I do like to use. This is perhaps a better paper for scenes where there's a lot of wash rather than detail, perhaps. You just make sure that's well wetted. And when you do this sort of painting, a lot of the technique and so forth comes down to timing, because this will start to dry now, and I want to therefore get certain things in fairly quickly, but then wait for the paper to dry so far before I continue. I'll describe how important that is later on. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of yellow ochre and perhaps just a little bit of Naples yellow as well. I'm going to use that mainly over the middle distance. So just leave bits of white here and there. The detail work on the foreground vessel is going to be fairly dark, and therefore I can paint over that. Bring just a little bit of that into the water. I don't want to go too far with that, because I don't want to lose too much of the light in the water. Okay, that's fine. So clean the brush. Pick up some Payne's Grey. And having wetted the paper already, I've got plenty of time to get this in. I haven't got to rush with the sky. I'm just going to form some very, very simple clouds. The sky itself is not the focal point, and therefore I'm not going to spend too much time getting in complicated cloud formations. Leaving a bit of white there between the blue and the yellow, and then bring some of that in as well, streak some of that in down here. Into the water. Horizontal streaks give you slight wave effects. I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush, again with Payne's Grey. Paper's just a little bit wet for this perhaps at this stage. It will quickly dry. Just to streak in some waves or ripples. And to warm that up, because that's close to the eye, I'm going to just use a little bit of ultramarine blue. The ultramarine blue is the warmest really of the blues. Blues are cold, but ultramarine blue is the warmest of the blues. Just put that in the middle distance. That's fine. If you find you've got too many streaks, take a dry brush and just even some of that. That's fine. Now I'm going to add a little bit more to that as it dries. It's a bit too wet at the moment. And remember that the rule always is that whatever wash you put in on top of another wash, the second wash should be slightly drier, slightly stickier than the first wash. Otherwise you end up with mushrooms. There we go. Just move that around a little bit with what I call a hungry brush. So I'm using slightly stickier Payne's Grey. As the paper is beginning to dry now, that's holding out okay. Just a little bit too much fuzziness there, just take that out. That's fine. It's quite easy to overdo that. We don't want that. Don't want too many lines in line with each other. Give it a variation. That's it. That's better. If what I'm doing now is a little bit too fuzzy when it goes in because the paper's that little bit too wet, then I can just use a dry brush, straighten that out. Quite like the way that the sky is going. Got this lovely sort of slightly fuzzy, misty effect up there, which is quite nice. That's fine. Good. Now I'm going to work on the middle or far distance ground, these areas up here, and I'm going to do that with yellow ochre and dirty it up with just a little touch of burnt umber and a very small touch of Payne's Grey. I want a dirty-ish colour. Let's just see how that looks. Yeah, now that's spreading out a little bit too much, a little bit too fuzzy. The paper there is still just a little bit too wet. So, just a little bit too early to do that perhaps. I don't know if that's going alright, but what I can do now is dry the brush and just tidy that up by dragging that across, getting rid of some of that fuzziness. It's all a matter of timing. Make sure the brush is clean. That's better. Strengthen that a little bit. Add slightly more blue here and there, just to get, I mean these are just buildings in the background which I'm not really defining at all. It'll do fine. Okay, I'm going to let that dry off now. Now that I've dried that off a little bit, I've added just a little bit more burnt umber, a little touch of blue into those buildings, the old monastery and so forth in the background, up the hill. Still quite fuzzy, which is nice because it matches up with the fuzziness of the cloud. But I've dried that off, and now I'm going to start work on the middle distance buildings of the harbour itself. Fairly mute colours. using burnt umber with touches of Payne's grey. So I think, because it's all from an old sepia photograph, so difficult to say what the colours originally were, but it doesn't matter. You can make up your own, really, from your own imagination. So start off with, I'm going to do the roofs, basically. There's a chimney there, which is why I left that gap. And the thing to do is always go for a bit of contrast. So that's one roof there, this one here is just a little bit darker. Where you've got two colours or tones coming together which are very similar, to get to separate one from the other, you can just leave gaps. Perfectly acceptable. And also, to get a bit of texture in as well, you can drop in, whilst that's wet, a little bit of ultramarine blue here and there, just to give a bit of texture. I was going to make this right hand side of the roof light actually, but in order to get it to stand out a bit from the background, I'm making it a little bit darker. Put that chimney in there, that's okay. Put the chimneys in, they need to be too precise about those. A lot of it is just about a bit of contrast. You can leave some areas white. Some of the roofs will be grey or almost black with slate. Distant windows and doors. Okay, you can see how it's going, and a little bit of yellow ochre on that side of that building. Okay, so I'm looking for contrast areas. That's the side of that shed and that wall there are not quite separate enough, so I just add a little bit of blue to that just to get a bit of contrast. There's an outside chimney here, so that's okay. These are old working buildings, so there's no need to be pristine, there's no need to be too precise with them. I can always remember one artist telling me that one of the best, most useful colours that they had in their palette was dirty water. It just helps to make contrasts and so forth. The end of this building here. Okay, you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to put a bit more down there, just a bit of contrast, that's fine. Same with this one here. And so I shall continue to get that the middle distance buildings finished. So I've continued with these middle distance buildings with simple roof and wall type shapes. The original photograph was fairly obscure over here, so I've simply put in some grey slate roofs, window shapes and so forth. The tones and so forth I've used. I've allowed to sort of go deeper in some places, lighter in others, just to, there's another roof there, just to get little bits of fuzzy and faded contrast work in, just one or two little windows. It's important that these windows are not too, in the middle distance buildings, are not too dark, just knock that back a little bit. I don't want them to take the eye away from the focal point, which is going to be this vessel over here. It's a bit dark there, so a bit of water on that, just take that back a little bit. Don't be tempted to put too much detail work in there. I will put just one or two little shadows in, and I'm just going to use a bit of burnt umber for that, mixed with just a very small amount of Payne's grey to make it dull. I'll put a little shadow there, put a shadow across there, perhaps a little bit there, just to give these buildings a little bit more 3 dimensions, and a shadow down there for that. That's fine. But I'm not going to put lots of shadow over here on these buildings, underneath the eaves and so on, because again, it gives them too much detail, brings the eye in a little bit too much. I will put just 1 or 2 little chimneys in. Okay, that's enough of that. Now I'm just going to finish off for the middle distance this area over here, the far jetty, with a little bit of, start with a yellow ochre, nice and light. Drag it across there, leaving some of the white. It's perfectly okay. The important thing is not to put too much detail in. Okay. shutter work in there. Okay, that's good enough for that. I'm going to do a little bit of work now on the focal point, on the sailing vessel here. Before I do any work around it, because I want to get it as contrasty and dark as I want, and then when I put in the jetty and so forth surrounding it, I'll make sure that's not so powerful in its tone that it overpowers the focal point itself. So again, plenty of wet into wet here. It's all just simple shapes. Okay, come back to the net. A little bit of transom decking showing there. Then we've got some of the fishermen on the deck. Again, we don't want too much detail. Using a bit of Payne's grey. These two talking to each other. I think it's always important to get figures into a painting if you can. It just gives feelings of scale. And a bit of the human touch. It's okay. Always important not to do too much on them. Remember that these are old work boats, old fishing boats. So there's plenty of dark and dirty marks. It's okay. Bit of detail work there on the deck, okay. Now the sails are red ochre, so a bit of burnt sienna for that really. This is Winsor Newton burnt sienna, which is a lovely, lovely colour. This is the best burnt sienna I've ever come across, I think. A bit of burnt umber under that too, especially on the side of the sail, on the other side of the mast. A bit too much perhaps. That's better. These vessels, for the mizzen sail, as a sail at the back of the boat, had what they call a bumpkin, which was like a bowsprit, only over the back end. So the sheet of the sail went out to the end of the bumpkin, right out at the back of the boat. So that's what that line there is. So again, the sail appears on both sides of the mast. Now you can see how by using greater tones on the focal point, this vessel, it begins to come forward. What I tend to do for the shapes is to wet them with the colour I'm going to use, fairly wet, and then go back in with more of the same colour, stickier, just to build up to the kind of tone that I want to end up with. So I've established the shape with a light tone of the colour, and then gone back in again, wet into wet. So you can see the sail now is getting richer and richer in tone. Against that light sky I want it to be nice and rich. Bit of burnt umber. You can see I left the mast white there. I'm going to put some tone on it, a bit of a colour on it in a second. Good, that's going okay. And then on the mast itself I'm going to have some white highlight on it, so I'm just going to use fairly sticky burnt umber with a little touch of Payne's grey. Leaving some white to show up Okay, and that's the focal point, the main fishing vessel, more or less complete. So now I can do a little bit of work on the jetty around it, and then we're well on our way. So you can see I've done some work now on the wharf area here on the right hand side. It's quite fuzzy, but with just enough detail work with these vertical stays and so forth to indicate what it actually is. If anything, it's slightly taking over the focal point, the fishing vessel, and so I'm just going to warm this up a little bit with some burnt umber. Burnt umber has a lot of red in it, which is quite nice, and you can see just by putting that on that has just brought that forward a little bit more, warmed it up, and brought it forward of this area here. The other alternative is to put some water over this, dampen that back. I think that's fine. I think that's relatively well balanced. So we're getting very close now to finalising, finishing our painting. We've got some reflections to go in. I'm going to reflect a little bit of the buildings on this side here, but be very, very loose. Just put a little bit of water to start off with, where those reflections will occur. So just reflecting that middle building there. This one here was sort of fairly dirty. Then we've got there and a slightly bluer grey mark just there, that's fine. I've already reflected that steam tug. There's a little bit grey going into there. And we've got these roofs. And this may look a little bit of a mess at the moment, but once I reflect some of the rough window shapes, then hopefully it'll become a little bit clearer. So that's all we need to put in there. Very easy to get lost in some of this. That's fine. Not going to do too much more there. And then important, just to put slightly darker lines through that, which join the shapes together, little ripple marks. Now of course the focal point and these dinghies over here and so forth are all floating in mid-air at the moment. So I'm going to make up a reflection colour there of Payne's grey, bit of burnt sienna, sometimes also just a little touch of red as well, just warms it up slightly, and then giving some white caps for the reflection, for the ripples. Okay, got the reflections of the sails too, so just go back to my burnt sienna there, not too much. There. Okay, just let that dry for a moment. You can see where I put in reflections using Payne's grey, a little bit of burnt umber for the hull, and I've used sort of dirty burnt sienna for the sail reflections and so forth. Join some of these reflections together so that everything works together. I'm just putting in now, using some white gouache, some little speckly white horizontal lines, thin lines, for ripples and so forth, and that just tends to lift. But you don't do that too much, just a little bit there, here and there, and not in the I do it in the foreground, but not in the background. Just a little bit, just to, as I say, lift the painting slightly. It's getting the exact amount of water you need for the white gouache is difficult. You just have to experiment a little bit there. Okay, I think that's us more or less complete. Let's put a mount on. That always helps to show what it will look like when it's in the frame. Yeah, that's okay. We're on to a winner anyway, because we're using some lovely warm colours. Most of these are Winsor & Newton, and I find that their watercolours are some of the best, especially their burnt sienna, this lovely brown you see there. I think it's the best burnt sienna I've ever come across. But the other colours too, the yellow ochre, the Payne's grey and so forth, are all Winsor & Newton colours. We've got a nice little bit of captured light here and in the background there. Nice captured light up here. You can see I've broken this up a little bit and given a little bit of interest by putting in some seagulls. When you put in objects like seagulls and so forth, it's always best, I find, to put in odd numbers, so 3 or 5 or whatever. You can position them so that they take the eye down into the, by putting them into a V configuration almost, or a line. You can arrange them so that they take the eye into the focal point. But I didn't really think that was necessary. That I think there's enough tonal contrast there, enough warm colour in the focal point for it to work by itself. So, and you can see there the background buildings, nice and fuzzy, nice and light, just giving enough contrast against the sky to make them stand out. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I've certainly enjoyed doing it, and just by using a limited palette and timing yourself when you've wetted the paper, timing it so that you get these sort of far distant tones in just at the right point, so they don't go too fuzzy, just fuzzy enough so they're nice and obscure, and then waiting for it to dry a bit further so you can put a little bit more detail into the middle ground, and then when it's completely dry, doing the focal point. Anyway, thank you for watching.